What's the name of this podcast again?
Clean win by Costabile. Charging toward the net. He scores! It is a storybook game.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Monkey Business, brought to you by LacrosseMonkey here on the MonkeySport podcast. Huge episode for you today. We have National Lacrosse Hall of Famer Mark Millon called in. Talked to him a few days ago about the growth of the game, some of his biggest moments. A guy that's really climbed every mountain in the world of lacrosse, a certified legend no matter who you ask. Great conversation with Mark that we'll get to in a little bit. We talk again about the start of the pro leagues and everything and where he was. We got Hank from LacrosseMonkey here as well.
Hello.
Let's talk a little bit about the pro leagues. Hank, how we doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great. Excited to be bringing you yet another Monkey Business here at the start of February. So let's get into it. Big day today, the day that we're recording. The PLL just announced they're coming to Dallas. That's
Correct.
where we're located. They're going right down the street to play at the Star in Frisco. So let's start there on the tour-based model of the PLL and everything like that. Your thoughts?
So first of all, for us here locally, super awesome that we got pro lacrosse coming
Very
back through
excited.
again. With sort of the uncertainty of the MLL and the Rattlers currently, it's kind of nice to have some good news of something coming through. And I think the Star is a perfect venue. It seats like 12,000 people. It's indoors. It's got the jumbo screen. You've got kind of the luxury aspect of like the food and the drink and all that. So I think it's a perfect venue for lacrosse, and especially in a city that, 2 years ago when the Rattlers first came in, they sold out every single game, had the best attendance in the league. So this is definitely something that should blow up here in the summer this summer.
And it's cool to see. So we've talked about this before kind of off air, but the PLL, when they first started, putting together the league and saying they were on this tour-based model, the biggest thing was like, hey, we're going to, bring lacrosse to all these new heights and these new places that they've never been to before, or that the sport's never really been to. And then their first season was, Boston,
Hotbeds.
Philly, Atlanta, all these places that you would like.
Traditional lacrosse marketplaces.
Right, exactly. Which, of course, it's a business. Obviously, they need to go where
For sure.
fish where there's fish, right? But it's cool to finally
Fish
see.
where there's fish.
It's cool to see like Dallas. That's not really. It's growing, I think, for sure. But it's probably easier for us to say because we're here. But it's cool to finally see like them going out west to the place that's not Denver or LA.
For sure. I mean, and someone who's been here and playing in the sport since like 2005, 2006 and seen the growth of it firsthand, it's sort of cool to finally get some more pro action coming through. Over the last 8 or 7 years, we've seen college teams come through and play at SMU, have like a little jamboree. We'll have a couple D1 and D3 teams come in, and that's always really well attended. It's unfortunately, usually really cold for that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So for the summer, when you're going to the Star, which for those who aren't aware is the Cowboys practice facility up in Frisco, it's all indoor. It's super luxurious, all expense. It's
gorgeous.
Super nice. So for a lacrosse atmosphere, I think it's going to be nice, and it's nice to see them come west. I mean, we were a little worried about, I think the first 4 cities that they announced they'd already been to last year.
It was all
which
repeats.
Was kind of a bummer, but like, now they're starting to go a little bit more west and try to figure it out. And I think going west or even going north to like a Minnesota or Chicago, I know people are claiming for as well, would also be a good look for them.
So we talked about this for those of you subscribed to Monkey Sports Podcast who maybe listened to some other episodes. We talked about this in our most recent hockey episode of how although Dallas isn't like a lacrosse city, a lacrosse area, DFW.
It's not a hotbed.
Right. But just the sheer size of the city alone, like having 7 million, 8 million people in the DFW area has to be able to bring in people to a place like the Star that the Rattlers close one side for a media side. And like you said, attendance is always incredible. The MLL championship was there the season before the Rattlers got there, which was an awesome experience. So I really hope that the PLL does well there. I'm confident that they will. But I kind of growing into the overarching idea, what do you think of just the tour-based model as a whole, now that we're 1 year into it?
So the tour thing's kind of weird. As someone who kind of looks at sports as sort of almost a regional thing more than anything, you have your team, you cheer for them, you ride or die for them, and you cheer for colors over than players, right? You cheer for the blue and white of the Cowboys or, the red, white, and blue of the Patriots. That's kind of your team in your area, regardless of who's on the team. And so what the MLL did initially is they established teams, they established the marketplaces, and have kind of created a history for each of their team, a branding and all that. And that's kind of slowly tapered off as we've gone on and here, and as funding's gone down, and there's a bunch of business reasons as well. So the PLL was like, screw it, we're going to go for this crazy model. We're just going to tour around. We're going to try to go to different cities every weekend, give our guys a destination to go to because they're all busy in the summer. A lot of these guys are coaching, they're recruiting, they're out and about. So
working other jobs as
for
well,
sure.
too.
And
I mean,
most of those guys are, very few people, maybe the top 5% of the lacrosse world in the pro scene is just doing pro lacrosse.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like they're coaching, they're working at whatever company, they're selling stuff, they're doing all kinds of stuff.
They have to be, sure.
And so to see this tour schedule is kind of interesting, but my biggest thing with the tour schedule that I've kind of struggled to comprehend is why it hasn't gone in more of a rock tour kind of, where you're going from city to city to city and you can follow it on a chart, right, across the country. You start in the Northeast, maybe in Boston, you work your way down, you come down the coast, you go to Florida, maybe head north up to Chicago, west to Denver, and then you finish in LA for the end of the year. I think having sort of a more structured tour would be really interesting because right now it's like north, south, west. It's kind of all over the place, and I think for a fan that's super hard to follow because it's just a random city every weekend essentially.
Yeah, I get the point, and you had made this point earlier in the day before we started recording, and I kind of started thinking about it more. That would be cool. Like, obviously, it works from a rock tour sense in, like, yeah, you're playing a Tuesday in Oklahoma City, and then a Wednesday in Dallas,
like
and then a Thursday in Austin, and then a Friday in
Yeah.
Houston. Right, exactly. So you're almost having to do that.
Right.
But when you have these guys that are like, yeah, I have to go to my job in Chicago, and then I've got to fly to Dallas for the weekend to play lacrosse, like, it doesn't really, I think, logistically, like, as a fan, definitely following that, but no fan is going to be like following that. They're not going to be like, oh man, yeah, and then the next week I want to be here, then the next week I want to be here. I think like the travel aspect of it, because there's so much time between weekends, doesn't work well enough to fit into like a schedule. I agree that it would be cool, but
sure.
I think it's
or
not
if they
something
compressed
that's like
it, right?
necessary.
If it was a more compressed schedule, they're like, we're going to do 2 months of lacrosse, and then we're done. We're gone.
That'd be cool.
You know what I mean? Like, we're going to wait for the summer recruiting season to be over. That usually ends around July 4th, typically for college lacrosse. So once that hits, they're like, all right, we're in now. And they could just go hard and just go for a 2-month schedule. I'm sure from an injury perspective, that's tough. And I'm sure from an availability aspect, that'd also be tough. But if they went to a lot of cities that had more indoor stadiums like we have here in Dallas, where that heat's like a non-factor, that would also be really interesting to see as well.
One thing I've been kind of surprised about that I sort of expected from the PLL when they first announced the tour-based system is like, and maybe it's just because I've not seen it, and maybe this stuff does happen behind the scenes, but the PLL's, pretty well documented. I'm sure anything that they've had has been put on social media somewhere.
I'm sure RJ has told us at some point.
Exactly. I'm surprised it's not more of a spectacle. Like that you go and there's, concerts related to all this stuff, and it's like they're going to player appearances and all this. Like I'm kind of surprised that it's just like, hey, we're in Denver, we're playing 3 games, and then they bail.
And they're just out.
Right.
More like a Super Bowl media day availability. There's like some sort of circus
getting
or
there
something
Friday
going on.
night and doing some kind of like, hey, PLL concert or
maybe
whatever.
you have
if you buy tickets, you get in for free.
Or maybe you have like 2 local all-star teams come in like, of high school kids and they play each other. Something like that. You've got the guys from the PLL are coaching, or maybe they're refereeing or something like that to keep it more engaged.
Sure, just around.
Because lacrosse is one of those sports where you don't really need to be super peak athletic. You don't really need to be super like ready to go. So it'd be really interesting to see them maybe have older PLL guys play with like high school kids or, stuff like that. Yeah. Would be very interesting to see from a spectacle perspective.
Because from what I remember, and maybe this is just a weird fever dream kind of a memory, but the LXM Pro Tour that used to do the same touring model had it more like that. I remember they came to Austin when I was in high school, and it was awesome. It was a whole event. It was this big spectacle. So I'm surprised that the PLL kind of, and obviously LXM Pro Tour maybe is a bad taste in some people's mouths, but it's something that they definitely did things correctly in the sense that, like, they went to weird spots. Like, it was weird to have pro lacrosse in Austin in the early 2010s, but it was a cool experience.
You got to take shots, right? You got to take swings. If you don't, you're going to fail, right? Like, what if they just go to Phoenix and like 500 people show up? It's like, well, that didn't go well, but at least they tried, right? They went for it. I think sort of both of our hangups with that league at times is sort of their half in, half out nature, right? Where they'll say one thing, but then they'll do the complete opposite. Sometimes when it comes to, let's grow the game, let's go here. And they're like, Salt Lake City, we're not going.
Yeah.
Chicago, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Like back to Homewood, like that's fine and that's cool. I love those fields. I love those stadiums. I'm someone who believes that Hofstra Lacrosse Stadium is like the mecca of lacrosse, right? But ultimately, you need to try. You need to get out there and push it because, you look at something like the WWE, which has a traveling schedule. They're going to every city they can.
Yeah.
And that's a much larger league, a much better fan base, but they're going for it, You got to take chances. You got to go, maybe have 2 games a week, something like that. Just try something new.
Especially when the argument, too, because I remember when they first came out and they were talking about the idea of the touring model is like they're banking on people having more of a connection to the player, like saying, oh, man, I loved Joey Sankey when he was in college, so I'm going to follow the pro team that he's on regardless of where it is. But then so yeah, that's great to say that, but then you can't make a team of all Terrapins and play in Maryland. Like if you're saying we're gonna put,
They certainly tried with the whip
Oh yeah,
sticks.
no, definitely, yeah, exactly.
That was their goal, right? Was to get college kids that play together, essentially.
Right, because they want the fan that grew up like, oh man, I'm a huge Terps fan. I never get to see them because I live in Dallas, Texas. Yeah, well then they need to go to those. But no, I think they're making the right move. Dallas will be very cool. I'm curious to see how they round out the rest of their schedule. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more repeats. But it's interesting too because Atlanta and Dallas, both MLL cities, both teams kind of up in the air. So I'm hoping the
conspiracy
Rattlers.
hat going on right now.
Yeah,
I think the Blaze announced they're going to Philly.
I guess that's true. The Blaze are gone.
So when that announcement came out, we shot a message from one of our other employees here. I was like, oh no. Because the same thing happened with Atlanta. They announced it. They're playing at the Atlanta Blazers stadium that they used to play at. And then a week later, they were in Philly. And they announced they're going to play at the Rattlers Stadium, their home stadium. And that's kind of up in the air.
And the Rattlers, maybe pulling back the veil a little bit just from what we know from working with them and having friends in the small Dallas communities, I think that the way that it was handled was not great. I think employees kind of showed up to lock doors and shut down email servers and stuff. And it was like, oh, I guess the team's gone dark. And then the league came back and said, oh, no, the league has assumed the team and all this stuff. But it's, I don't know. I'm staying hopeful. I don't think the PLL announcement really bodes well for our hometown Rats. But
well, it's kind of interesting when you look at it from a league perspective. You look at the PLL, it's sort of this new league that's trying new things or claiming to. And then you look at something like the MLL, which is like the most established and stable of all the leagues right now, where they've got home cities, they've got fan bases, they've got people that like go to these games, drink a lot of beer and go crazy, and they're playing music the whole time. And then you've got the MLL, which is kind of in between both of those right now, right? They have sort of that tradition of rabid fan bases and sort of fun experiences in game, cheap liquor. It's just a part of sports, right?
Right, yeah.
But then also they're trying to go more into media and more into interaction. And you look at the difference between the league's interaction on Twitter and Instagram, all that kind of stuff. The ML is trying, but they're just very base level. The PLL is going deep and deep because they're bringing in the people that kind of understand it a little bit better.
When the PLL first started, I remember thinking like, my thought is like the MLL has been so complacent with, they've been the only real pro outdoor league in the past 2 decades.
Pretty much.
So there's nothing that they've needed to do to grow. It's been like, yeah, we're fine.
Right?
Right, exactly. And like the fan base isn't rabid enough to where people are like, oh my God, all these changes need to be made because of this and this, like you would see maybe in the NFL or NBA or something. Like the eyes aren't on it enough for change. But then when the PLL came, I think they lit a fire under the MLL, or at least my thought was that they were going to. And I agreed. I don't think the MLL has reacted in a way that is the most beneficial for themselves. I think pro lacrosse is definitely growing, which is great. And I think maybe a merger would be the best possible scenario for both teams.
That was my initial thought. When the PLL came out, I was like, I had flashbacks of, so back in the NBA, I think it was in the 70s, they had the ABA and the NBA, right?
Yep.
And the second the ABA was created, everyone's like, when's the merger coming? Because that was essentially their end game, right? Is we're going to play 2-3 seasons. I think ended up being like 4 or 5 total. And they're like, we're just going to merge. That's our whole goal, is to merge and to get in with the NBA because they won't give us teams in these cities. So we're going to create our own league in those cities and see if the NBA has to take notice. And the ABA came in and just made a bunch of noise, made a bunch of changes to the game and pushed it forward, right? Added the 3-point line, added a lot of rule changes. And I thought the PLL would do similar. But with Paul Rabel's sort of spite against that league, he seems to want to be the one to force the MLL to come to him hand in hat, right?
Well, so it seems too now that the PLL is kind of going out and picking off these old MLL venues that it's like maybe we are trending that way. Maybe the PLL finally says, okay, yeah, we want a local establishment, which is something that Paul has come out and said. He's like, Tour League is great, but down the line, I do want to be a city-based, just like every other league.
Which is much more expensive.
Yeah, and the MLL did that too, though. We talked to Mark Millon about the early days when it was the summer showcase, and they were going around the exact same thing. It was just
it's like the N1 tour, essentially.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it was like, hey, this is what lacrosse is. Be ready for it. So I don't know. I'm maybe a little bit woke to the idea that the PLL are going to these old MLL venues to say like, okay, yeah, the Star is awesome, or yeah, the place in Atlanta is great. Like, here's the Atlanta team. The MLL is giving up rights to lacrosse in Atlanta, giving up rights to lacrosse in Dallas venues, whatever, and moving from there. I think that would be hopefully and potentially the best possible scenario for outdoor pro. Because like you said, the NLL has it figured out. Dude, indoor is awesome. Going to box games is a blast.
Their season is in like the perfect time. They're kind of in the lull between football playoffs and basketball really taking over. Their baseball's not in their way at all. They just exist in their own space. They compete a little bit with hockey because they play in a lot of the same stadiums and same markets. But when your hockey team's out of town, your pro lacrosse team's right there. You can go to the game for like $10, $15, get a beer for like $5 and you have a great time, right?
Yep.
It's cheap entertainment, it's local, and it's something to care about. And I think the MLL lived in that space very briefly in the summers at times, but I don't think they fully embraced it. I don't think they sort of embraced that cheap, like family entertainment aspect. And that's something that, the PLL is, trying to do, especially going after kids, especially.
Yep. It's exciting, though. I mean, again, we'll get to our interview with Mark Millon here in a second, but he talks about kind of where he sees the game going and kind of keeping that same niche and just growing within what it's already in and not trying to be this big worldwide or countrywide phenomenon. I think the Pro League is in, or rather Pro Lacrosse as a whole, is in the right space and they're moving in the right direction. I think there needs to be just more cohesion that I think comes sooner rather than later.
For sure. And a little tease for that Millon interview coming up here soon. U.S. Club Lacrosse League. Coolest thing we've ever heard about.
Oh, man. Yeah. Wild.
It's insane. The coolest thing ever.
A full episode on that club league.
I'm about to do like 1,000 YouTube videos on this league. It's insane.
If you have the opportunity, Google search some old U.S. Club Lacrosse while you're out there because it's crazy. It's almost like the tour model for the PLL and the MLL. Like it was these teams that were just kind of around and playing. yeah, in a sense. Mark kind of talks about it. But with that, we'll go into our interview. National Lacrosse Hall of Famer, 3-time All-American, 2-time All-World MVP, one of the top 5 players of all time. Mark Millon, currently directing the Millon Lacrosse camps. We talk a little bit about that. But without further ado, our interview with National Lacrosse Hall of Famer and legend, Mark Millon. All right, we're here with National Lacrosse Hall of Famer, MLL All-Star. Really, any accolade you could think in the world of lacrosse, Mark Millon. Mark, how you doing?
Great, doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, we're excited to have you on. Obviously, tons of stuff to talk about. You have an incredibly illustrious career. But to start it all off, let's start about where you first began with lacrosse, where you first fell in love with the sport.
Yeah, so I grew up on Long Island, and even though Long Island is such a hotbed, back when I was growing up, in the late 70s, early 80s, lacrosse still wasn't hadn't really taken a foothold. But I had some guys in my neighborhood. Me and my brother, we had a pretty good sized neighborhood full of boys, and a lot of the kids were messing around with lacrosse sticks, and then kind of shortly thereafter, me and my brother were playing serious baseball at the time. But as we started to get exposed to the lacrosse, sticks and stuff around our neighborhood, my dad was a high school teacher at Syosset High School, which had a good lacrosse program, and he came home and said, "Hey, the lacrosse coach, said that we ought to get a lacrosse stick." My dad brought us home, kind of a funny story. He brought me and my brother home sticks. But all we had really seen, we hadn't even seen the game played live. We just seen the boys in the neighborhood. So he brought home lawn sticks for us. And we just thought it was like some kind of weird mistake. So we just went in the garage and grabbed a hacksaw and cut it in half. And needless to say, my dad, on a teacher's salary, just brought home sticks. He had no clue either. It was like, what are you guys doing? You just ruined these sticks. So it was pretty funny. And that's where I got my start. So
the Mark Millon defensive career ended before it even really could start, huh?
Yeah, I know. It's too bad because I love watching great defensemen, and had I seen a little bit more lacrosse at that time, I might have just kept that long pole and never turned back.
So, as a Long Island guy, you elected to go to UMass. What kind of spurred your decision making and wanted to eventually leave the island?
So, I was getting recruited by, I went on a recruiting trip up to Syracuse. The Gates were there.
Mm-hmm.
Tom Marichek had just gotten to school there, and I had a great recruiting trip. My grades in high school were probably not, I didn't have quite as many doors open as I would have liked to have had, kind of in hindsight. But, I had decent grades, but, Ivy League schools are out. Some of the good other lacrosse schools, like a Carolina, was probably out. So I was getting recruited. Maryland came and saw me at my high school, and I ended up just going on a recruiting trip and just almost instantly fell in love with the culture at UMass. There's a lot of talent in the program, and the coach who was there for quite a long time, Dick Garber, he was like a real father figure. He was a legend in the game, and just the way the players interacted and the way he kind of looked over with this father figure in the program. And then I watched a game up there. I watched UMass play Syracuse, and I kind of just fell in love with it. And I felt like with all the talent that was there, it was going to be a program that really was about to break through and start getting to some Final Fours. It really never happened for me. We were close, But regardless, I had an incredible experience up there, and that's kind of why I went.
So at any point in that whole process, once you kind of got to UMass, were you even considering going anywhere else, or was it just kind of one of those moments of like, this is the place to be?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, my good buddy in high school was Bill Day. He played at Carolina. He coached in the MLL, played in the MLL for a little bit, but we grew up together. And for a while there, we really kind of wanted to go to Carolina together. So that was kind of like one of my first real, when I was probably like a freshman. And then I sort of fell in love with Cuse, and I thought I wanted to go to Cuse. I went on the recruiting trip up there and just absolutely loved it. But then, again, shortly thereafter, going to Syracuse, once I got to UMass, I was like, man, this is the place to go. This is home for me. So that's kind of how it played out.
Once you kind of got to UMass and started to acclimate yourself, do you remember like those first couple practices, what it was like transitioning from the high school game to the college game? Were you scared at all? Did you have a confidence of like, I got this? What was kind of your mindset going into that?
One thing I've never been is scared, you know. I mean, I grew up, I played my whole high school career, really ended up obviously playing my whole career a little bit smaller than most guys. So I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, and I always played and had a lot of confidence. So I was never scared. I do really kind of strongly recall those first three practices, and it's helped me over time to guide young players that are going away to college, to help guide them, because it is quite an alarming experience. I mean, the first thing is being away from home for the first time was tough and challenging. It takes a couple weeks to settle in, but on the lacrosse field, I was confident, but I just was shocked with just how fast things were moving and how fast the game was playing. And so it definitely took a little bit of time. Caught my lumps a little bit. I got to UMass, and there was three guys that ended up making All-American at the attack position. Rob Cotignato, Scott Hiller, and Jim McAlevey all made All-American that year. So I didn't play a ton as a freshman, but it was a great experience, and I do recall those first few practices just being like, whoa, this is crazy.
So when you talked about the speed of the game and when transitioning from high school to college, what sort of advice do you give to players to like help them transition to that speed? Is it the way that they practice their stick skills, or is it just kind of something they need to experience for themselves to really get used to?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it really is something that you can't necessarily practice. I think the biggest thing is mentally going in and anticipating that everything's going to move faster. You know, the ball's going to arrive quicker. It's going to get thrown harder. You know, your teammates are going to make better decisions quicker, and the ball's, you know, you're not going to think you're open, but then the ball arrives. Foot speed and the defensive play, everything that you're getting attacked quicker and harder, and slides are coming quicker and harder. So not anything you can really practice for, but if you go into it, and someone guided me going into my freshman fall at UMass and said, listen, it's going to be fast, man. You got to be ready for it. It's going to be really, really fast. I think that helps, just being mentally prepared.
So you talked a little bit about kind of being undersized and having that chip on your shoulder and the speed of the game and everything. Do you think the game where it is now has changed to kind of tailor those smaller, quicker guys, or is it still tougher for, you know, the Will Mannies and Rob Pennells and guys like that are a little bit undersized to still kind of get their foot in the game?
You know, I don't know how much the game has really changed. I mean, if you watch like one of my college games, I think the ball is maybe on the ground a little more. I think the long pole's ability to handle the ball and get the ball off the ground has changed. So it definitely looks a little bit different. As far as the size of the player, I don't know that there's all that much change there. What's really interesting in lacrosse is there's always been this, like, you know, I don't know if I can recruit him. And, you know, some of the more elite Division I schools still recruit size, but just go through the roster of elite players for the last 15, 20 years. And, you know, whether it's me or Mike Powell or Rob Pennell or Will Manny, Grant Amen, right? Like, you just go through and it's littered with dominant attackmen, more attackmen than anything else, obviously, but guys that are like, you know, 5'8", 5'9". So the game, the way it's played, and the stick is the great neutralizer. So I always think that like size just doesn't play that big of a role. Now, again, maybe at like the close defensive position, it helps to be a little bigger and a little longer and rangier. But offensively, I don't think it's a big deterrent.
So kind of looking back into the college days, who do you think were some of the best players that you ever got a chance to play against defensively, that you had to go up against in one-on-one situations?
The guy that used to give me a bunch of trouble, and we ended up being teammates at on the USA team in '98 was Reed Jackson. He played at Rutgers, and he was someone who was big and long, and he had great feet. He did a good job. A guy named Dan DeTola played at Yale. We didn't play Yale all 4 of my years, I don't think, although we might have. But he was good. He gave me some troubles, and then post-collegiately, I hear people talk about Petro and all the time, and I was fortunate, because I got to play. I was in a unique situation where I really played right at the end of an era of some of the really great players like the John Tucker and Vinny Sombrado and Dave Petramala. I got to play with those guys, and then also got to play with the entry of Casey Powell and the J. Del Bears and stuff. So I got to play in a unique circumstance with a lot of the great players.
94, you graduate college, and was there any plan for playing professionally? I know obviously the MLL was still a few years away from its inception, and a few kind of clubs and things around there, and we were kind of looking up. I think have a few questions about your early club, but before that, was there any plan to continue to play, or was it just all right? I put in my time, and now it's time to go in the real world.
You never really thought about playing, being able to earn an income from it. But remember, the NLL, and it was the MILL, right? The Major Indoor Lacrosse League was still called the MILL when I was playing. It switched over to the NLL. Mm-hmm. But I got drafted and played right away for the New York Saints. There was some ability to play professionally, but I think at that time, I can't remember exactly, but I think we played 10 games. The pay was probably maybe couple $300-400 a game. So I wasn't looking at it when I graduated I'm going to play in 2 pro leagues and be able to be a pro lacrosse player.
Sure.
But with the NLL, MILL going on, I definitely knew I was going to play. And then, but I knew that I was also going to go out and get some kind of real job. But the other thing that was going on, and you alluded to it, was club lacrosse. And club lacrosse, there was no social media at the time, and we didn't play in fancy venues, and we didn't have really sick uniforms and everything. So if you just add up the uniforms, the social media, the TV coverage, and the venues, and just subtracted all that, club lacrosse was the pro league. And all the top players who had graduated during the last 5-10 years all played in that club league, and it was really intense.
Going off of that club league, how was that organized? Was there a head commissioner? Was it just a bunch of random clubs in different cities just scheduling games against each other?
No, there was it was called the USCLA, United States Club Lacrosse Association. They had a whole board and everything. There was the North Division and the South Division. Every year the North, a team came out of the North and out of the South, and there was a championship. The championship was really pretty sick. I played my first year out of college, I played for Long Island Hofstra Lacrosse Club. Our home venue is Hofstra Stadium. And then we played against Mount Washington Club. And if I went through, there was probably 30 Hall of Famers in the game. Petro covered me the whole game. So, I was competing against Petro. Sal Lacasio was in the goal for Long Island Hofstra. And the Gates, I think the Gates were on, I think at least Gary was on the Mount Washington team. I mean, it was the who's who of lacrosse at the time, and it was basically the same as the PLL or the MLL without all the fancy stuff.
So I'm curious, you're talking about without all the media and everything. Was this something that was attracting fans? I mean, obviously, you'd take any lacrosse fan now would have killed to be there, but was it something that you guys were playing in front of people, or was it just meet up and play a game?
Yeah, so surprisingly, the elite clubs, I played for Long Island Hofstra, and then when I moved to Baltimore, I played for Mount Washington for a bunch of years, and the games were on Friday nights, and Mount Washington, we would get 500 to 2,000 fans there, believe it or not. I mean, it was just a grassroots movement. People knew that all the best college players had been playing, and they would turn out on a Friday night at Mount Washington. And I don't think all the clubs were drawing like that. Mount Washington was pretty unique. There was a lot of superstars players there, and so it wasn't, all the venues were not like that. You might play on a Sunday afternoon with 50 people there, but some of the games were drawing pretty well.
So were you guys actually practicing for this, or was it kind of like a men's league is nowadays, where you just show up for the game and then get out of there and go grab some beer after?
Yeah, I mean, it's cool just even answering the questions, because it reminds me of the days. Yeah, we would actually practice once a week. definitely a different time and a different culture. There was no scrutiny, and you didn't have to go out there and perform on Saturday afternoon in front of NBC cameras and stuff like that. But so the post practice bar scene was pretty rowdy. but yes, we practiced usually once a week for that league, for the club league. And it's weird now because you call it, like, people are so caught up in, like, club is synonymous with, the term club is either college club, you think of that, which is a little secondary to Elite Division I or Division II or Division III. And then youth club is, the 91's Long Island Express, and people kind of get caught up. They don't really know what club is. It was called club, but it was basically the pro league, so it was really, really competitive.
So we'll jump around a little bit. So year 2000, you get the MLL Summer Showcase, or the MLL comes around, and you've been playing on the club circuit for a little bit. Was there any, or rather maybe walk us through how you were approached to play in this Summer Showcase?
Yeah, so that's another really great story for me, in that I was working for Warrior at the time, and Dave Morrow at Warrior. So the whole MLL came about from the 1998 World Games, which was arguably the championship game. Is pretty famous, arguably one of the best games ever. We were leading. USA was leading Canada 11-2 at one point. We ended up winning in overtime. It was at Hopkins. It was probably up until the time for many years after it was the most televised game. So Jake Steinfeld had either been at that game, Bodied by Jake, had either been at that game or saw it on TV, and then linked up with Dave Morrow, and said, let's get this league off the ground. And I was working for Warrior at the time, so I was like intimately involved in all the planning. There was a sports marketing agency called SFX. They were up in New Jersey, and they were kind of a behind-the-scenes operator of the league, and I was involved in some of those meetings, so it was pretty cool to kind of be involved in the whole back-end planning and getting the thing up and running.
Seeing where pro lacrosse is now, could you have ever guessed that when you were playing in the first handful of games around the country that we'd be at a point where, there's two leagues and all this national coverage?
Yeah, I mean, when we did it, the showcase and the, many years of the MLL, I know there's so much conversation about what the MLL did wrong and, why the PLL was created. And, I try to stay out of all that, but at the end of the day, the showcase was done really well, and the first bunch of years of the league was done really well. So I could envision, we all thought at the time in 2000, I looked at some old interviews recently because the MLL's been putting stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
We all felt that we were pioneers. I don't know how much people know about the history, but there was a pro outdoor league in like the late 80s, I think, and it was terrible. It lasted a half a season, and then it folded. So for all intents and purposes, all the players felt like they were pioneers, and we all thought that we were, starting something that would be around for a long time.
One of your fellow players from that summer showcase, John Grant, recently came back and started playing in the MLL again. You got any pod exclusives for Mark Millon comeback 2021?
No, because I don't know if you guys followed it, but I already did that once.
Right, yeah, exactly. 2013.
Yeah, and I came back and I was in unbelievable shape, and my fellow UMass alum and buddy on my Cannons team one year, Kevin Lavelle, was on that team that I came back, the Rochester team, and after a couple practices, he was like, "Damn, you're literally moving exactly the way you did in 2005," which was all good, but I just couldn't sustain it. I tried to convince myself that I could play a little bit differently and play a little bit slower style, and I couldn't do it. I just had to keep playing the way I knew how to play, and my body wouldn't hold up, so I didn't even make it through that whole season.
Are you still getting a chance to play, though, every now and then? Like going to those, I know there's a big tournament out like at Lake Placid. Are you getting a chance to play in any of those summer leagues with some of the older guys?
So it's really weird. I'll give you kind of a crazy analogy. Like when people say, try to quit this or that, quit smoking, smoke a carton of cigarettes, you'll smoke so many, you'll just be sick and not want to play or not want to smoke another one. I know that's a little crazy analogy, but I don't know if I'd really recommend that. But for me in lacrosse, I played so much post-collegiately. That club league was, as I said before, the pro league. And then I played 9 years in the NLL and was whistling off every weekend. And being the type of player I was targeted, and I got the crap beat out of me. and then all the years I played in the MLL. So now I'm like, I don't. I have plenty of opportunities. A lot of my buddies do go play, but like I kind of got my fill, and so I don't play that much at all, if at all.
So not playing as much. I know you're still in part of the game when it comes to the coaching aspect. What's kind of been the most rewarding part of you giving back and teaching kids how this game is meant to be played?
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely, and again, people say this and it could so easily be construed as cliche, but when you look at yourself as a player and all the things you did, that's all great, but the impact I've been able to make through my camps and stuff, I've had close to 30,000 kids come through my camps and sign up for my camps that I've actually got to work with, and then probably another 50 to 100,000 kids that I've just gone to clinics and tournaments and camps and met. And the ability to like mentor young kids and teach them the game, I did back in the early 2000s. I realized my career wasn't going to go on forever, and I wanted to create a little bit of a legacy. So I did this Mark Millon's Offensive Wizardry DVD, which even pro players to this day tell me, man, I watched that growing up. So the thing I'm most proud of looking back is just the impact and the mentorship that I've been able to provide, the instruction I've been able to provide young players for a long time.
So speaking of looking back and things like that, what's your number one lacrosse memory? I would imagine that 98 championship game is up there.
Yeah, the 98, and again, this is kind of crazy, but like I had posters on my wall, and I've gotten a little bit, I don't know if you're on my Instagram or anything, but like I've gotten a little bit more sentimental over the last year or so, just looking back at some old tapes. I just watched an old UMass game where we were down 12-5 to Yale and ended up pulling it off in like the last couple seconds. And the 98 game was unbelievable, and some of the MLL titles. I was part of it, the Wings team. We went into Toronto and shocked the world and beat the Toronto for the NLL championship in 2001. So there really has been a lot of incredible memories. But to me, the one that sticks out the most, growing up, I had USA posters, lacrosse posters on my wall, so I just really wanted to play. Kind of my lifelong lacrosse dream was playing for Team USA. So in 94, I graduated from UMass and tried out for that team. The tryout was actually in the summer of 93. And when I got the call and I got the letter that you made the team, it wasn't really an on-field moment because I wasn't on the field at that moment, sure. But that was the best moment of my lacrosse career. Just, the lifelong dream coming true and knowing I was going to wear that jersey for real.
Is there a different, set of nerves that come into the game when you're lacing up for Team USA versus for UMass or in the professional league?
It's a great question. Not really. I teach young players, and I sort of understood this from pretty early on. Like, my whole thing was I was going to practice the way I was going to play, and I practiced, and I did a lot of visualizing so that I practiced so hard, even on my own, I would go out and shoot. And once I got to the game, whether it was the NLL championship in Toronto or Team USA, like you were playing another lacrosse game, and it was a big game. And the other thing that helped me, and again, I talk to young players about this, what separates some of the greatest players for me are if you would have watched me play in a summer league game and watch me play in a Team USA semifinal, or championship, there really wasn't a lot of difference. I just was wired a certain way to go so hard and play hard and compete. I didn't really get caught up in that moment, like I have the uniform on now, and now I got to play differently. I just was wired to play one way, so the nerves didn't change too much.
Where do you see lacrosse continuing to grow? Do you think it's something that becomes a mainstream, NBA, NFL, or does it kind of just keep growing within its niche?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I would have expected that after, launching the MLL in 2000 and, being here in 2020 now, that I guess I wouldn't have expected there to be two leagues, and whether that's good or bad, obviously, sometime down the road here, there's going to be one league, I would assume, and I would have guessed that by now, you'd have a little bit more fan interest. There's, obviously a lot of lacrosse interest in this country, but if you went to an MLL game in 2002, you might have had 4,500 people there, and, you go to a PLL or an MLL game, and there's not that many more, except for some special games here and there. So with that said, 20 years later, I don't know exactly where it's going to be. I don't see it dying, that's for sure. But I don't know if it ever moves into a true mainstream. I don't know I don't really know what my feeling is for sure on where that's going to be.
Do you think there's anything that needs to be tweaked to make lacrosse that, or is it just something that it's always going to kind of have that hurdle?
I think one of the challenges that everyone's tried to figure out is if you look, when do you play the leagues? Most of the sports like football, youth football is played in the fall, and high school football is played in the fall, and college football and pro football is played starting in the fall. And then lacrosse is really a winter/spring sport now, and the fact that MLL and PLL is most of the summer into the fall, so I think that's one challenge. I just feel like there's a bunch of challenges that I'm not exactly sure how to overcome them. If I could, magic wand, I think playing in the spring would probably be a little better, but how that stacks up and trying to compete against college lacrosse and stuff would be a challenge. But the summer's a really difficult time because club lacrosse and youth tournaments have taken hold in such an incredible way now that I have two young boys now myself. I have a 15 and a 13-year-old, and all we're doing all summer is traveling around playing in tournaments. And so people are always gone and traveling and playing, that the summer's a really hard time for them.
What's the main goal, or rather, what can people expect when signing up and going out to a Mark Millon camp?
Yeah, I think the thing that we do and we've always done differently, I'm just kind of fanatical about like organization and making sure. And also, probably one of the good things I did was put my own name on my camps, and one of the bad things I did was put my own name on my camps. So, but what you get when you have my name on it is I take tremendous personal pride in it. We're super organized. And we put such an incredible premium on instruction. I've seen so many camps before where you show up and the coaches roll the balls out and the kids just run around and play and they have a great time, but they don't get a whole lot of value out of it. And every one of my camps, whether it's Ohio or Charleston, South Carolina, Long Island, we put such a heavy premium on fundamentals and instruction, and that's, across the board at any location. So that's really what you're going to get, and we take a lot of pride in it.
Well, perfect. You got anything else to add to us before we let you go?
No, appreciate you guys having me on, and it's been a blast to catch up, and again, I appreciate it.
All right, yeah, absolutely. There we go. World champion, lacrosse Hall of Famer, Mark Millon. Mark, thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Once again, thank you to Mark Millon for coming on the podcast and talking to us. What do you guys think about the pro game and the growth that has developed since the 1990s until today? Let us know on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, wherever you can find us. Shout us out and let us know what you think about the pro scene as a whole.
Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of Monkey Business, brought to you by LacrosseMonkey on the MonkeySports podcasts. We will be back next week for another episode of The Outer Roll, this time with Ev Bomarito from Vaughn Custom Sports to talk about new hockey goalie pads and kind of the growth of technology in that game as well. So if you know any hockey fans, you are a hockey fan yourself, know any goalies, make sure to get them subscribed to the Monkey Sports podcast. We will be back for another episode of Monkey Business at the start of March. But until then, be good or be good at it. We'll see you next time.